what do we do in this era? Something feels off. That's not an existential kind of angst. It's just we've just come through some weird times with policies in North America and Europe that we can debate, agree on, disagree on, about our personal liberties. We have concerns about our currency, about our banking system, about our political climate, our debate, the weaponization of science, the weaponization of the media, the trust or distrust, whatever your leanings are. But these are concerns. And everywhere I travel, it's amazing how many people are asking me, so what are you thinking? Where are you going? As if there's some Shangri-La we can find an answer to, or some zip code that's going to have all the answers for the concerns, and there just isn't. There's a lot of fog. I want to talk about America, and not just because I'm an American, but because America is the home of the world reserve currency. It is the home of the U.S. Federal Reserve. Its policies do impact all the great central banks. There really are two bond markets, the one in the U.S. and the one outside of the U.S. So when you have theories about the U.S. policy, it really does affect the world. And when I look at the America today, I look at the global financial picture, and again, I can't see all of it, but those images really talk about heroes and anti-heroes. And I have the picture of the Anzacs, the Gallipoli, and the Canadians, and the Australians, and the New Zealanders, these brave men who kind of fought the good fight in the First World War, and then the RAF in the Second World War, and these young guys in their 20s going out to fight the Luftwaffe and protect Britain from the Germans in the Battle of Britain. And then I look at guys that are the new heroes, the Adam Newmans of the world, the Theranoses of the world, the young, kind of hip, arrogant class of multimillionaires who really haven't done much for the world but have done a lot for their own balance sheets. And the value systems today of what we consider a success, what we consider heroic, I think is very upside down. And then, of course, I know I'm obviously making a little elder abuse fun of Biden. I'm not here to take a partisan view. I have a problem with Joe Biden, not because of his politics. I have a problem that's very clear to everyone in the world, in America, outside of America, that he's not the only one making decisions in the White House. That should be fairly clear without being conspiracy theory or debated, and that should raise eyebrows and concerns as we get into other themes. So there's a lot of images there that kind of talk about the current issue. A lot of it's political, some of it's psychological, some of it's just downright dishonest and frankly corrupt. You look at some of those figures, and the contrast between the Adam Newmans and the Sam Bankman-Frieds and the Theranos executives and this other great generation, there is a palpable difference to the type of people that we look up to today and the type of people we've kind of forgotten about. And those values may sound esoteric and vague, but they still matter to a lot of us. That's why a lot of us are asking, what do we do? What do we do in these times? Everything starts with this theme. And again, I'm trying to get through 40 slides, and I won't get into all the weeds, but debt clearly is a problem. Our debt levels are massive. Our income levels relative to our debt are insulting. Our tax revenues relative to our debt levels are insulting. America, like so many other countries in the world, is living well beyond its means. You know, like a spoiled frat boy with his dad's credit card, trying to buy popularity, pushing off the bill payment until somebody else has to be stuck with it. And in the meantime, kind of with excuses. There's some numbers at the bottom that I think are very important. 120, well, that's 120% debt to GDP. Again, these aren't academic numbers. America has 120% debt to GDP. It has an 8% deficit to GDP, which is assuming no recession in the future, that number could get higher. These are not just academic numbers I throw out to show how clever I am, but these are absolutely essential to our daily lives and the daily lives of American debt. We have a negative 65% net international investment position. That just means America doesn't really have a piggy bank of assets outside of its own borders. Its debt problems are internal. Its consequences affect the whole world. 34 trillion in public debt, over 100 trillion in government, household, and corporate debt in America. That is an abstraction. It's a banality of numbers, obviously never going to be repaid. And the other number there is I have 20 and 10. The Congressional Budget Office in the U.S. is projecting another $20 trillion in IOU issuance in the next 10 years. So we're already at 34 trillion and counting. We got there very fast. Another 20 trillion more IOUs to be issued over the next 10 years. These numbers are simply unsustainable. And again, that goes to the rotten wing beneath the American dream post-1971. This is how America has changed. We are literally a drunken sailor economy. These are the ripple effects of debt. Everything we would want to talk about if we had more time, and I wish I did. If you're looking at currencies, the currency debate is an important debate. If you're looking at the bond market, if you're looking at geopolitics, if you're talking about cryptocurrencies, if you're talking about precious metals, all of these themes are ramifications of debt levels that have just become absurd, openly absurd, that is not discussed in the media, that is not a conspiracy theory. It's not kooky to understand the balance sheet of your country and have it discussed openly. We all do it with our wives or partners or family at home. I joke about this, but it's not a joke. Whether you're in the top 10% or the bottom 10%, every member of every family has to sit down and decide. That shouldn't be a hard discussion for the government to have with its people. It should be transparent. Those are pictures. The guy on the top is a famous picture from the post-French Revolution in the 1780s. They had had these great ideas in their National Assembly, very similar to the modern monetary theories we've seen in the last 8 to 10 years. And the idea is, look, we can just print money. You know, what's funny is that was a palpably good idea, they thought, in the French in the 1780s. And that's exactly what MMT theorists like Mosler are saying. We can print money without consequences. That's not going to affect our currency. It's not going to affect the dilution effect or debase our money because it all works out. And again, if we had more time, I'd explain his theory. And there's a quote under there by Mark Twain, but it's sometimes hard to imagine these guys take themselves seriously with these fictions. Okay, what's wrong? Centralized markets, dying capitalism, modern feudalism. That sounds really dramatic. Man, here's another gold bug selling this fear theory. If the Fed is hawkish, or if the Fed is dovish, the markets are going to be bearish or they're going to be bullish. It's a switch. It's not even a thermostat anymore. The markets follow Fed policy. What we've done is we've created a massive asset bubble in the risk assets, stocks and bonds. In America, this is not an exaggeration or me trying to sell fear. 90% of the risk asset bubble growth has benefited the top 10% of America. That's not healthy for America. This is a centralized stock market. I am a capitalist to the core, but the type of income that Amazon has made, and I went to law school, I studied the Clayton Act, I studied the Sherman Act. There were things called antitrust principles that no one entity or company had that kind of power. That marriage of massive power, frankly, it's the definition of fascism, but I know that's a sensational term. The average ratio of a manager to an employee was 32 to 1. That was in the 40s, in the heyday of the Ford era. By the 70s, it was 320 to 1. In Bezos' time, it's 1.2 million to 1 is what he charges himself in salary compared to his average employee. Again, I'm a capitalist. There's something psychopathic about that kind of money. And there's frankly something about vertical integration of Amazon, not to mention Google, Facebook, and the other fabulous 7. Our capitalism isn't capitalism right now. It's already distorted beyond recognition. And that, again, is not sensational. It should be discussed more openly. In addition to debt, we have a weaponized currency. But I do know it was a bad idea to weaponize the US dollar against Putin, whatever you think of him. That's not a political bias. It's common sense. John Maynard Keynes said, don't weaponize the neutral reserve currency. That's going to be bad. So weaponization of the US dollar was a big mistake. Another thing, we're having this big debate right now about hard versus soft landing. My God, the evidence is overwhelming that we are already in a hard landing. It's not even a debate about a Goldilocks scenario. And I use these evidence every time you raise rates, it always leads to a recession. And there's a whole list of examples down there. I don't have the time to go into chart by chart. Whether you look at the M2 money supply, whether you look at the Conference Board of Leading Indicators, we are already in a recession. We are already in a hard landing. The fact that we're still debating this means that the Fed and the politicos want to keep us distracted with nice words, basically lofty words to hide really empirically, obviously bad math. These are each experts who told us never to worry about another recession, or that printing money would have no effect on inflation, or that inflation would be temporary, or Nixon, when we went off the gold standard, that this would not affect the US dollar, and that would only be temporary. That was over 50 years ago. We still don't have a gold standard, and the US dollar has lost 98% of its value vis-a-vis gold since 1971. So I don't think anything those quote-unquote experts, our financial leaders say, is empirically fact-checked the truth. That's not anti-American, it's just accountability. More and more of the same thing. False values, false leaders, false heroes. I could spend 20 minutes on each of the men and women in these pictures and talk about the absolute lack of integrity. How these people at one point were considered heroes. What, because they had money? Is that the definition of success? How many zeros are in your bank account? The psychology of a guy like Klaus Schwab would be fun. Literally, it'd be a great course just on looking at Greenspan's personality and what that's done to the world. Financial crises from the ancient Rome back to the Ming Dynasty, the Weimar regime, South American regimes, Latin and Cuba, all the way to 1990s Yugoslavia. Here's what happens every time, ohne Ausnahme, as we say auf Deutsch, without exception. You have a debt crisis that is always followed by a market crisis, which is always followed by a currency crisis and inflation. And every time there's a currency crisis, there is always social unrest. You have a debt crisis, you have an inflation crisis, you have social unrest, and then you have what always follows, and this is the scary part, extreme political control from the left or the right. Again, we all see different examples of this in different parts of the world, but it's usually masquerading as something for your best interests or for national security when it's really just desperate trying to control you. And the evidence of that control isn't just CBDC, which is egregious enough. It isn't just the debate on the weaponization of science or the censorship of alternative views from Great Barrington to CNN. It isn't just the power that Google and Facebook and tech companies have over our lives. Those are just the tip of the iceberg. The scariest part is, after all those things happen, centralization, an opportunist comes in. What are they doing? They're getting more control, and you're the sheep. And they say it's for your own good. This isn't even about gold or currencies. This is just about history. We had great principles about separation of government. We had ideas about what is good or bad money, what is a central bank, whether we should have one, who should coin our currency, who should produce our currency. It wasn't supposed to be a central bank that has the control of the supply and cost of our money. This is just a simple example of human nature. John Kennedy, Profiles in Courage, he tried to write a book about politicians who actually cared about their country, not about getting reelected, who actually felt compelled to run for office because they were worried about their country, not about their legacy, their income, or their reputation. Nietzsche talked about these type of people too. They hardly exist because most politicians have a will to power that would make, Nietzsche blush. Almost impossible to find an honest man in parliament or an honest man in Congress. It doesn't mean they're impossible, they're just very hard to find. So a big problem is human nature.